Hello and welcome to Workplace Safety for Construction Supervisors, preventing accidents through hazard identification. Let's begin by talking about the difference between an accident and an incident. Accidents are unexpected, unplanned, and uncontrollable. They can cause physical injury, property damage, or equipment loss, or some combination thereof. Equipment loss may be equipment failure, temporary shutdown, or a financial loss. Incidents, on the other hand, can come close to causing physical injury, property damage, or equipment loss, and in some cases do, but instead go unreported. The interaction between workers, equipment, management, and machines are complex enough. But even more complexity is generated when all of these people and machines are blended together to form the workplace. Now, construction supervisors may be used to this environment. However, each day is different, and each day a construction supervisor or one of the workers can bring a different issue to the workplace. On one day, we may be thinking about responsibilities to our families. On another day, we may have gotten news of a sick friend. And let's face reality, even our best friends can get us PO'd at times, distracting us from our work. And there's usually financial issues. Sometimes these financial issues may seem insurmountable. And when all these issues come together on the workplace, we have an accident. The Occupational Safety and Health Act was signed into law in 1970. It states, among other things, that employers must provide workplaces which are free of hazards, free of serious injury, and free of death. Some of the obvious benefits of a workplace safety program that is based on OSHA include lower insurance costs, fewer compliance inspections, less litigation and legal fees, as well as fewer settlements, and less indirect accident costs as well. This includes hiring new workers, lower productivity, and poor morale. But what about the worker? Should the worker be concerned about an accident prevention program that actually assists the construction supervisor and management? Well, the worker too gets more money because your payroll deductions are less because the insurance costs are less. There's also an increased sense of pride about your workplace. You may have experienced this already. When you want to show your children where you work, do you take them to the clean job site or the one which is a mess? And which of these sites has a better safety record? And finally, there's less potential for personal injury. But the biggest reason of all for wanting to have a workplace safety program is your family and your friends. Think about this. Who's the best friend you have? If you're like most construction workers, it's most likely someone that you work with. According to OSHA Statistics, there were 4,114 deaths in the workplace in 2011. The construction industry accounted for 721 of those deaths, or 17.5%. Construction was the #1 industry for deaths on the job in 2011. Because of this, OSHA has identified what they call the Fatal Four. The fourth deadliest issue on the construction job site is being caught in between, which accounted for 19 deaths in the construction industry in 2011. Number 3 was electrocution, accounting for 67 deaths. Being struck by an object, 73 deaths. And the number 1, falls, accounted for an incredible 251 deaths in the construction industry in 2011. These four issues alone contributed 410 deaths in the construction industry in 2011. If we could eliminate these four, that's 410 mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters that would return home safely every day. If any of you have ever had to tell a family that a loved one is not coming home today, then you know just how important workplace safety is. Let's now take a look at the most cited violations by OSHA on the construction site. Not surprisingly, number 1 and 2 are scaffolding and fall protection, both related to falls, the number 1 killer on the construction site. Number 7 is powered industrial trucks, which could be related to being struck by or caught in between. Numbers 5, 6, and 9 are controlling hazardous energy, electrical wiring methods, components, and equipment, and electrical system design, all of which could be related to the number 3 killer on the construction site of electrocution. Number 10 is machine guarding, which can also be related to caught in between. Numbers 3 and 4 of the most cited violations by OSHA are hazard communication and respiratory protection. And oddly, hazard communication could be related to any one of the top 10 cited issues on the construction site. So now, let's move on to how we can communicate hazards effectively through incident reporting. So what can be done? Let's take a look at recognizing, avoiding, and correcting potential injuries. In this segment of the program, we're going to be looking at statistics and goals, helping ourselves and others, 3 key areas, attitudes, safety is everyone's responsibility, and why the negativity about safety, and finally, systems, peer keeping, and reporting. And let's begin with where are we going, statistics and goals. This chart shows us the amount of injuries that have occurred in the workplace since the year 2000. As you can see, there has been a significant decrease between 2000 and 2011. However, the bad news is that still almost 200,000 people can be expected to be injured in the workplace in the coming year. Will these injuries be minor or life-changing? We can only hope for the best and do what we can to prevent them. Unfortunately, deaths in the workplace has not shown the same declines as injuries in the workplace. In fact, the numbers have been kind of erratic. There has been a decrease since 2008, however the workforce has also decreased since 2008. So let's move on to what our goal should be moving forward. This is a simple message, but the goal itself is so difficult to achieve. However, this does remove all politics, company grievances, management likes and dislikes, and it is the most important thing of any job site safety program to ensure that no one gets hurt. In many cases, an accident occurs on a job site that goes beyond the nicked finger or a couple of stitches. In some cases, those accidents are life-changing. What happens on the job site after the accident is it's recorded, marked, and then we moved on. Essentially, we're left to forget about it. However, the person that was injured, the person who had that life-changing accident, must live with that for the rest of their lives. To reach our goal, we must first build a foundation, no pun intended. We must use tools that develop a safe environment, encourage safe behavior, build and establish safety systems, and finally gain cooperation and encourage the use of new ideas and new safety programs. In order to maintain a safe work environment, we must look at three key areas in order to help ourselves and others. These areas are the physical hazards, the attitudes towards safety, and finally, the systems in place to maintain and improve safety on the job site. Let's first focus on the physical. The physical has three subsets. These subsets are being aware of a hazardous environment, avoiding dangerous activity, and finally, wearing your personal protective equipment. Let's now take a few moments for safety awareness. What I'd like you to do now is pause the video and identify all of the safety concerns generated by this one gentleman. So how many safety concerns could you identify in this photograph? Besides the obvious of this gentleman working off of a stack of blocks, there's also the concern of he's not wearing a hard hat, he's not wearing any working gloves, and furthermore it does not appear that he's wearing any safety glasses. However, we also have to think about the incidents that may have occurred leading up to this. As an example, how did he get on top of the stack of blocks to begin with? Furthermore, how exactly does he plan on getting down? There's going to be safety concerns as he proceeds with this job. When you see a project like this, you should head straight to the job trailer where you know it's going to be safe. Well, on second thought. In many cases, the very people responsible for safety hardly present a safe environment. What are some of the hazards you can see right here in a simple trailer office? So how many hazards could you identify in this so-called safe area? Did you see the poorly stored chemicals, the overloaded electrical outlets, the tripping hazards, and all that paper can be a fire hazard. Sometimes to identify hazards we must use a little imagination. Here we have what we like to call the pyramid of hazard identification. Let's assume that we have a little soap on the floor. Is this a hazard? Well, of course it is, but it is, after all, just a little hazard. But let's imagine what could possibly go wrong with a little soap on the floor. Could we have an incident? Remember, an incident is usually an accident which goes unreported. Let's say that someone has slipped on the soap but walks away. Could someone else slip and hurt their back? Here we do have an accident and medical treatment is going to be necessary. What about a lost time accident? Could someone slip on that soap and break an ankle, break an arm, or perhaps break their wrist? Absolutely. It's very possible. Worse still, could someone actually be killed from that little bit of soap on the floor? Could someone slip and fall, do serious damage to their head, and actually die from that fall? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. Worse still, it has happened. Some people have slipped on ice in the street, and with no way to protect themselves from the fall, have split their head open and passed away from the injuries. Now that we have an understanding of hazard awareness, let's take a look at avoiding dangerous activities. Though it's easy to say, avoiding dangerous activities on the job site is easier said than done. We have dangerous activities going on around us all the time. Here we see a crane swinging a girder over Russell, David, and Danny's head. However, there are precautions and steps that we can take to minimize the danger and protect ourselves and our coworkers. Now, let's take a look at this situation. Though David is welding, and he's welding safely, wearing all the proper PPE, Russell is approaching him, putting both himself and David in danger. First, Russell is not wearing the proper PPE for welding. In fact, he may not even know what the proper PPE is required for this job, because he is not a welder. If it's so important that he talk to David, he should wait until David acknowledges that it is safe for him to approach. So now let's go ahead and talk about PPE, or personal protective equipment. Though sometimes it may seem mundane and silly, much thought goes into the proper PPE for various jobs and various tasks. This personal protective equipment is meant to protect you, not annoy you. If you're in a situation like Russell was in the last scene where you don't know what the proper PPE is, go ahead and ask. A good welder, a good worker, and a good supervisor will have an answer. So don't forget your PPE: hard hats, vests, glasses, dust masks, hearing protection, and gloves are all part of a well-stocked construction job site. Now that we've covered the physical obstacles to a safe job site, hazard awareness, avoiding dangerous activity, and wearing our proper PPE, let's take a look at our attitudes on the job site. And before we do, we must keep in mind that safety is everyone's responsibility. Remember our pyramid? Well, imagine how much catastrophe could have been avoided had someone just stopped and wiped up that soap the way that Russell does right here. We never would have moved up the pyramid had the first person who noticed the soap actually stopped and simply cleaned it up. It only takes a few minutes, and it could save a life. So if it's so easy, why is it that safety has so much negativity attached to it? Where does that negativity come from? Take a look at this guy as he walks past a host of hazards. What I'd like you to do now is pause the video and jot down a couple of things that this guy could do to make this a safer environment. Well, what did you identify? Well, those blocks could have been cleaned up in less than a minute. Also, if you notice up above, there's a fire extinguisher sign pointing down. However, the fire extinguisher is not on the hook. It's on the floor. In these cases, usually that fire extinguisher is only going to get further and further away from its proper location. What about wearing a hard hat? Shouldn't this gentleman be wearing one on a construction site? And what about this hose? He could have wrapped it up. All of these things would have taken this gentleman maybe 2 minutes, and he could have prevented a very serious accident. Many times, people's aim is not completely on target when it comes to safety. Though their intentions may be good, they insult and embarrass those that they work with. How many of you have seen this scenario before? Here, Ronnie gives Danny a pink hard hat because Danny has forgotten to bring his to the job site. Though the intent is that Danny will never forget his hard hat again, Danny walks away embarrassed that he has to wear it for the day. Now, what do you suppose Danny's attitude is going to be towards safety from here on in? Positive or negative? And in some cases on the job site, you may see that someone is doing something that certainly appears to lack any intelligence. But showing anger towards that person will most likely cause that person to reciprocate. Here, Ronnie's screaming at Danny, and Danny's most likely going to start screaming back. Now we have two people screaming, and nobody's thinking about safety. What about that supervisor who always uses safety as their reason to fire people who are not performing? Or the worker who refuses to believe that management is taking safety seriously unless management pays $100,000 for a ventilation system for a porta-john. All of these situations create negative attitudes towards safety. However, there is a better way. Let's now move on to what is probably the most important aspect of any safety program, the systems that we use for safety on the job site. And let's start with peer keeping. Peer keeping is not just a phrase, it is the single most important action that you can perform on the job site to help your safety program and, most importantly, help each other. So what might happen here with a little peer keeping? Well, Ron could comment positively on something Danny is doing safely, like wearing his safety shoes, but then remind him that it's also important that he wear his hard hat. And don't give him a pink hard hat. It's only going to get him angry and embarrassed, and he's going to feel negative towards the safety program. Remember, one of the most difficult decisions a supervisor can make is to fire someone on the job site. And one of the most beneficial decisions that they can make is to create an effective safety program. Let's not use one to justify the other. As Ronnie threatens Russell with a pink slip here, David and Danny are looking on without their hard hats. When we enforce safety, let's be sure we enforce it against those breaking the rules, not those following the rules. As a supervisor, you know that some employees can be difficult, but don't get drawn into the trap of using safety as a performance tool to get rid of poor employees. A supervisor's enforcement of safety should be clear and consistent. We'll talk more about this in the system segment of this program. And speaking of difficult employees, how can we handle this situation? David wants Ron to invest big money into a ventilation system for the porta-john. Now, we all may be very well aware that this is a ridiculous request. But if David doesn't get his way, he's going to stomp around the job site claiming that management does not take safety seriously. So this situation is going to have to be handled with a little tact and a little skill. We should talk to the employee, explain that even though the situation is inconvenient, it is not unsafe, and that safety discussions should be focused on preventing accidents and injuries or worse. However, we shouldn't walk away there. If the employee has other complaints, we should stop and listen to them. Furthermore, if we have an opportunity, we should tell the employee some of the things that he is doing that is safe, like wearing his hard hat, and thank him for his contribution to safety, and ask if he has any other concerns. So the process of peer keeping is pretty simple. First, we'd want to observe the employee. We don't want to startle the employee, no matter what it is that we wish to talk to them about, as this may be harmful to the employee, or perhaps harmful to you, as it was harmful to Russell a little bit earlier. Once the employee has acknowledged you, you can comment on something that the employee is doing positively. As an example, you might say, "It's good to see you wearing your safety shoes, and it's good to see that you're wearing safety gloves." However, at this point, you'd want to suggest a safer process. Let's assume that the employee is not wearing a hard hat. After commenting positively, you may say something to the effect of, "However, this task really requires a hard hat as well." Lastly, and most importantly, be sure to talk to the employee about any and all safety concerns that they may have. If they feel that you're talking to them to enforce a rule simply for the sake of a rule and not for their safety, they will become negative towards the safety program. By now, we're all familiar with the scene where Russell wants to talk to David, and David is doing a job which requires extreme focus and caution, welding. However, let's assume for a moment that Russell has seen something that he feels may be unsafe and he wants to inform David about that particular issue. How could Russell go about telling David using the peer-keeping steps that we just reviewed? Well, Russell should wait until David acknowledges him. Then he can come over and comment positively and open the discussion on safety. So now let's take a look at another situation. Remember our buddy? Well, how could we handle this situation with a little peer keeping? What I'd like you to do now is pause the video and think about the steps that you'd take to handle this situation. Now we've hoped that you've identified that you definitely do not want to be yelling at this gentleman. If you startle him, he's most assuredly going to fall. So therefore what we'd want to do is get in front of him until he acknowledges us. Once he does, we could tell him that we'd like him to get down because we'd like to talk to him, but you're going to get him a ladder so that he can climb down safely. Once he's down, we may tell him something positive, like it's good to see you working hard and you're trying to get the job done. However, we are concerned about your safety. Therefore, we'd like to get you the proper scaffolding and the proper PPE. Now at this point he may cooperate and thank you, or he may say that no, he needs to get the job done and he's going to go back to work. However, it's your job as the super to explain what the priorities are, and on the job site, the priority is safety. Lastly, let's talk about the systems that we use on our job site. We all know that every job site is a little different. Some have safety talks before the day so that we can identify situations that we'll be facing. Other job sites might have lunchbox talks, and other job sites might have simple reporting systems that allow supervisors and other employees to be aware of hazards that they may be facing throughout the day. If your job site does not have a safety program, then you should create one, keeping in mind that the most important thing of any safety system is that it is clear, consistent, and predictable. Remember, the employee with the issue of the $17 billion ventilation system feels that he has a legitimate issue to discuss. If you don't discuss it, this employee is going to become negative. Furthermore, now armed with broken promises and lack of attention about his issue, this employee will march about the job site complaining that safety is not taken seriously and now your program is not moving in the direction you want it to move. Make sure that your system always promotes new ideas. And remember, you never know where these ideas might come from. Remember when Danny forgot his hard hat? However, once Ron explained that he needed his hard hat and the fact that Ron simply does not want to see Danny injured, Danny no longer forgets his hard hat. In fact, Danny is more than willing to help others. Also, every job site is a little bit different, so never crush an idea, or chances are pretty good you'll never get another one. Finally, always discourage unsafe behavior. This lets everyone know that you are serious about safety, and then they'll feel comfortable about approaching you and discussing other issues. So remember, if you can fix a hazard, fix it. If you can't correct it, report it. And always place a warning sign or some tape to barricade off the unsafe area. But never ignore an unsafe practice or operation, because you don't know whose life you might be saving. And if you follow these simple workplace safety practices, when you go to visit a friend's house, the reaction you get might be completely different. And this will conclude workplace safety for construction supervisors, preventing accidents through hazard identification.